going to walk through examples of each of those 5 types of business rules, starting with showing and hiding elements. So as Chris mentioned, this is a function that has existed for a while, but they recently extended it and made it much more powerful. So you have traditionally been able to hide or show fields using business rules, but this has been extended to basically any page element. So details, field groups, even tabs can be hidden now or shown now using the show hide business rule type. So we're going to walk through a couple of examples here. The first one is going to be showing a reason lost field when an opportunity changes to being closed lost. And the second example will be showing some additional elements on the page when the account type is customer. So I'm going to go ahead and pull up Creatio here. And we're going to start with that reason lost example. So as Chris mentioned, in order to do business rules, you're going to need to be in the page designer in Section Wizard. So let me go ahead and just open up this opportunity here and then access the Section Wizard, and that will take me right into the page designer. Once this loads here, you're going to see at the top of the screen, we've got a couple different areas we can go into. So it's going to default to the page view where we can add new fields and move things around on the page. But this is also where our business rules function is going to be located. So we'll go ahead and click into the business rules tab, I guess, there. This is going to load any existing business rules that are already in place and allow me to edit those or create additional business rules. So this first example, I sort of cheated a little bit. Creatio actually has a default business rule for that, but I just disabled that so I can create a new one and kind of show you how that works. So we're going to go ahead and add a new business rule. And you can see here on the page those 2 components that Chris mentioned. You've got your conditions and you've got your action. So the conditions are when we want the action to happen. So let's actually start down here at the bottom with our action, which in this case is going to be showing an element on the page. You can see those 5 types that we talked about listed there. So this is going to give us the ability to choose what type of element we want to show on the page. In this case, it is a field, which is the default. And it will give us a list of all of our fields in this particular section, in this case, the opportunity section. This would include any of your custom fields. There's nothing special you have to do to get a field or other page element to show up in that list. So this is what we want to have happen. We want to show this particular field on the page when a certain condition is true. In this case, when the stage of the opportunity is closed lost. So that's going to be our condition. We will pick the field, or again, as Chris mentioned, there's other types of attributes you can use. We're going to use the field, and you can click your magnifying glass, or you can just start typing if you know what the field name is. And then set up the condition. In this case, we want to look for a particular value in that lookup. You can also compare it to another field or again to some other settings. Oops, I picked field though instead of lookup, which is what I meant, because I want to pick a specific value for this lookup, in this case, closed lost. And so if the stage equals closed lost, then we're going to show the element reason for closing field. Otherwise, this field's going to be hidden. So let's go ahead and save this. We're going to have to sit through a couple saves here today in order to see these rules working. But hopefully we won't have too much of a wait on some of these saves here. And once this saves, we'll refresh the page and we'll be able to see that rule in action. So if I come back here and refresh my opportunity page, you can see the reason for closing field was displayed on the screen before we started. But at this point, it's going to have disappeared because this opportunity was not in the closed lost stage. And so I no longer see that reason for closing field listed here. If I were to go ahead and change this to the closed lost stage, that field would then display. Now the field currently is not required. Sorry, there was some default logic that kicked in there. The field is currently not required. That would be additional business rule, as Chris mentioned, which we will see a little bit later on in the presentation today. All right, so that was our first example of a show hide element rule. The second one we're going to do is showing some elements in the accounts page. So I've actually already just pre-opened this for us. Again, by going to an account record and then opening the section wizard to go into the business rules. How smart, I would have already clicked into the business rules tab, but I didn't quite think about that. So we're gonna have to wait for it to load for a moment here. And I'm going to create a couple of business rules because there are a couple of different things that I want to hide. So one of them, if I just click over here, is we're going to hide this customer number field that's over here in my profile section. That's going to work the same way as the one we just did. So we're going to set up our logic. Our type equals customer in this case is the logic that we're going to use. And then we're going to show the customer number field. So we can save that. Now, as Chris mentioned, sometimes you might have to have multiple business rules that have the same conditions. There's other things that I want to show on the page, but you can only have a single action per business rule. So even though I'm going to have the same conditions on this next one, which is that the type is customer, I'm going to have an additional business rule because there's something different that I want to show this time. And this time, what I'm going to show is this section of fields here called customer information. So instead of selecting a field, I'm going to select a field group, and then my customer information field group is going to show up. And similarly, if there was an entire tab that we wanted to show or hide, I'm just going to use the same logic again. And I'm going to hide or show this maintenance tab that's part of the service package with Creatio. So we're going to show or hide the tab this time. It's going to give us a list of all of our tabs, so we can pick that maintenance tab. So all three of those business rules have the exact same condition. They're even all the same type of business rules showing elements, but they're showing or hiding different elements. So for each element, you're going to have a different business rule. That does mean, something to think about how you're organizing the page. If you have a whole bunch of things that are going to show or hide off the same condition, then it makes sense to group those together like I did in this customer information section here, or in a specific tab, as opposed to having them sort of scattered around the page and needing, a business rule per field. All right, so we'll go ahead and refresh the page. This one is a customer, I believe, so the fields are not going to immediately disappear like we saw with the opportunities section. They will all still be displayed because our condition is true. So we still see all of those things that we just added that logic to. But if we go ahead and change this to a different type of account, you can see the field group, and the tab all disappeared at that point. As Creatio has added that additional function to make it possible to easily show and hide additional elements, something that I've started to think about and something just be aware of is there's also a function in Creatio to have different pages for different types of records. So you might be familiar with that in the activity section. They use that function by default. So there's different pages for emails versus calls versus tasks in the activity section by default. And so there's different fields that show up and things like that. So when would I use multiple pages versus when would I use business rules to show or hide different elements? I think it's going to depend in part on what the logic is. And it's going to also depend on how many things I want to hide in different conditions. So how many business rules am I talking about? Is it 100 business rules or 10 business rules? Because that's going to change my answer potentially. The multiple pages functionality does have to rely on a lookup field. So it's not going to support more complex logic. This example, the logic was pretty simple and would have worked with multiple pages because account type is a lookup field. But if I was doing something more complicated with multiple fields driving that logic, that may sort of rule out using multiple pages depending on the scenario. And multiple pages is also generally not a good fit for something dynamic like an opportunity stage, because the multiple pages don't refresh in real time if you change the value of that lookup field. Whereas we saw when I changed the stage or the type, the page immediately updated to show or hide those additional fields. Multiple pages doesn't work quite that dynamically. I would also be thinking about, like I said, how many different business rules you're maintaining. Is it going to be more work to maintain and add all of those business rules, or is it going to be more work to maintain multiple pages? Just something to, again, factor into making that decision.